Today's reading is part 3 of Survivor's Ball or the Donner Party, a short story in the collection Stranger Things Happen by Kelly Link. And now, Survivor's Ball, Part 3. In the dining room, a table had been newly laid for two, and he sat down with his back to the fireplace. At the front of the room, Mr. Donner was dancing with a stout woman in red. The fire behind him traced black figures on the walls and wavered over the faces of the diners around him. When he looked at them, they looked away. But they had been looking at him in the first place, he was certain. He wished that he'd taken a bath, or at least combed his hair. The heat beat at his skull, and the snap of the fire lulled him, while the cold streaming in through the open doors stung his eyes and plucked at his jaw. Half of him burned cold, the other half hot. He thought of going up to the tiny room again, to wait until it was time to go to sleep. There would be the same discomfort, the damp, cool sheets, and between them the sticky warmth of Serena's body. Jasper thought of the white eyeless walls and shuddered. It was preferable to sit here between the fireplace and the open windows. Framed in the window closest to him was a mountain, blunt and crooked like a ground-down incisor. Halfway down its slope he could see a procession of lights. He saw that others around him were intently watching the mountain and the moving lights. A waiter emerged from a service door beside the fireplace and began arranging another table. He set 7 places and silently disappeared again. Jasper looked back towards the mountain. His tongue went up to touch his tooth. He counted the lights on the mountain. The musicians sawed at their instruments furiously, and on the dance floor the dancers moved faster and faster, picking up their feet and slamming them back down, spinning like flames. Serena came into the ballroom. She was wearing the stretchy black dress and a pair of gaudy purple tights. She had washed her hair and applied makeup to the bruise on her forehead. Her face was white and delicate as ivory under a dusting of powder. She was wearing the silly red lipstick. "The better to kiss you, my dear," someone said. He stood up and went to her chair. "You look very beautiful," he said. She let him seat her and said bluntly, "You look like shit. Does your tooth hurt? Will you be able to eat anything?" "I don't know," he said, "but I'd like some wine." She sat down next to Jasper, put her cool hand on his forehead. "Poor kid," she said, "you're burning up." Mr. Donner left the dance floor. He borrowed a chair from the table set for 7 and sat down next to them. He was breathing hard. Jasper thought he could almost see the breath leave his mouth like tiny licks of wet flame. "Is your room adequate?" he said. "Our room is fine," Serena said. She stretched her hands out across the tablecloth towards Jasper. "What a nice hot fire!" "All the better to cook you, my dear," Jasper thought, and touched his tooth again. He said, "Where did all these people come from?" "This is the first course," Mr. Donner said. Waiters put down bowls of thin pink broth and poured red wine into Serena and Jasper's glasses. "Some of us have come from very far away," Mr. Donner said. "We meet every year. We meet to celebrate the triumph of the human spirit in situations of great adversity. We are all travelers, survivors of adventures, calamitous expeditions, of tragedies. We are widows and orphans, the survivors of marriages and shipwrecks. This is the 143rd Survivor's Ball." "That's nice," Jasper said. Serena squirmed in her seat. "You look so familiar," she said to Mr. Donner. "Have we met?" "One meets so many people," Mr. Donner said. He took a sip of wine. "We're expecting one more party. They're a little late." Is that why you keep the windows open?" Serena asked. "We're hoping that they'll hear the band playing," Mr. Donner said. "Music raises the spirits considerably, I find. We hope that they'll find their way back down the trail without further incident." "You're talking about the lost hikers, right?" Serena said. "There were 23 hikers," Jasper said. "They've only set 7 places." Mr. Donner shrugged. "Do try your soup, Mr. Todd." Jasper took a small sip of the soup. It was warm and salty, and as he swallowed it burned. "I'm starving," Serena said. She showed them her empty bowl. "Jasper's tooth broke, but he's afraid to go see a dentist." "It's fine," Jasper said. "I'll wait until we get back to Auckland." He had a very clear picture of a dentist in Auckland who would be a kind man with a well-kept mustache. A gentle man with small, knowledgeable hands who believed in using gas. Or maybe the tooth would grow back. The second course was a fatty cut of brown meat. There was a little dish of green jelly and carrots cooked with brown sugar. Steam rose up to Jasper's nose, thick and sweet. He diced up a carrot and ate it with his spoon. "I'm not really that hungry," he said. "After dinner," Mr. Donner said, "we sit and tell stories in front of the fire. I do hope you like stories." "Ghost stories," Serena said. "It's just like Girl Scout camp. I used to love the campfires." Jasper's wine glass was full again. He didn't remember drinking the last glass. "The better to drink you, my dear," his tooth said. He still had a sense of wrongness, an instinct that the proper thing to do would be to leave or perhaps just go up to bed. But that would mean the tunnel again, or the small coffin-like room with its sad, sagging bed. He took another sip of wine to fortify himself. The band was playing a new song. The song sounded familiar. It might have been Autumn Leaves. It might have been a hymn. "Have the two of you been traveling together long?" Mr. Donner asked. "Oh, no," Serena said. "We met 3 days ago in a bar in Queenstown. We're traveling around the world in opposite directions. I fly to Hawaii next Tuesday, and then I'm supposed to go home again. This is just Jasper's second stop." "Maybe I'll come back home with you," Jasper said. "Don't be silly," she said, but under the table her foot moved up his calf, nudged him between his legs in a friendly way. "I'm trying to keep as far away from home as possible, for as long as possible. Not that I have a home any longer. It burned down." "How sad," Mr. Donner said, smiling. "Not really," Serena said primly. "I'm the one who burned it down, but I don't like to talk about that." Jasper looked across the table at the girl he had met in a bar. She didn't look like a girl who would burn down her house. He wasn't really sure what girls who burned down their houses looked like. What was the name of the lipstick color? That had been the silly thing, something like Bury Me, or Red Death, or maybe Red Delicious. Maybe Fire Truck. "See," Serena said. "Do you still want to go home with me?" Under the table, her hand ran up and down his leg, pinching lightly. "Jasper isn't the sort who travels purposefully," she said to Mr. Donner. "He isn't the sort who's purposeful or smart or careful about the kinds of women in bars he picks up in bars, for that matter." "You've got to be careful," she said, turning to Jasper for a moment, "about picking up girls in bars. Good grief! What if I'd turned out to be weird or something?" "But he isn't careful. He's lucky instead. For example, he won his trip by filling out a form in a travel agency." "You are a fortunate young man," Mr. Donner said. There was just a small smear of mint jelly on Serena's plate. When he told me in the bar how he'd won, I thought it was just a great pickup line, she said. The tie-breaking question was, why do you want to go around the world? And he wrote, because you can't go through it. Isn't that ridiculous? It's true, Jasper said. He was careful to enunciate. Sad, but true. Serena smiled at him. I shouldn't complain, though. It's great traveling with Jasper. He gave me a plastic dinosaur, a stegosaurus. Thanks, Jasper, she said. Don't mention it, said Jasper. He wanted to say something, to explain that travel was important to him, that someday he knew if he traveled long enough he would eventually come to a wonderful, a magical place. His toothache was almost gone, just the smallest twinge very far away, practically in another country, some place that he had been stuck in for a while. He looked past Serena to the French window. The torches were now at the base of the trail. They swung back and forth, lighting up the great trunk of a kauri tree, a growth of ferns on the lawn before the hotel. Look, said Mr. Donner, here they come, just in time for dessert. The whole room rose from their chairs, applauding. 5 men and 2 women came into the room. They stopped, just past the threshold, as if uncertain of their welcome. They looked longingly at the fireplaces, at the empty plates piled up on dirty tables, but they did not move. Instead, the crowd swept towards them. Excuse me, Serena said. She got up and went with the others. Jasper watched her recede, the black hair fallen down around her shoulders, again a tail tucked into her painted mouth, the long legs in the purple tights. Waiters were going back and forth between the tables, extinguishing candles. Jasper watched as they pinched the small flames between their fingers. Soon the only light would be the red light of the fireplaces. The bulbs of the chandeliers were faint as starlight, guttering to blackness. At the opposite end of the room, near the windows, he could no longer see Serena or the hikers. The crowd was clotted and indistinct in the dim light. It moved slowly across the dance floor, pouring through the window like the massy shadow of the Black Mountain. Sitting by the dance floor was a single cellist. He had put his instrument down and was cramming balls of sheet music into his mouth. He chewed them slowly, his hands pulling the white pages out of the air around him as if they were alive. The wind blew out the chandeliers, but Jasper could still see the musician, his mouth and eyes wet and horrible. Where are the other hikers? Mr. Donner was biting savagely at his thumb, frowning down at the table. Sometimes people do unthinkable things in order to come home safely, he said. Impossible things, wonderful things. And afterwards, do you think they go home? No. You find it's much, much better to keep on traveling. Hard to stop, really. The French doors had shut. The hikers were cut off from the trail and the mountains should they wish to go back. The fire behind Jasper was flickering low, casting out more shadow than warmth, and yet the room seemed to grow hotter and hotter. His tooth no longer hurt. The wine and the warmth were pleasant. I can tell you're a good man, Mr. Donner. Otherwise my tooth would warn me. I've never had a toothache like this before. I've never been to a place like this before. I've never been to a party like this before. But your name, it's familiar. My tooth says your name is familiar. The crowd was moving back across the dance floor, towards them, towards the table set with 7 places, but he couldn't see Serena. She had been completely swallowed up. The cellist had finished his music, and, like a magician, he lifted the bow of his instrument, lowered it into his wide, unhappy mouth. Perhaps you recognize it, said the bearded man, but, on the other hand, what's a name, After a while, names are just souvenirs, places you've been. Let me introduce you to some of my friends." He waved towards the approaching crowd. "Mrs. Gomorrah over there, Mr. Belly of the Whale, Ms. Titanic, little Miss Through the Looking Glass, Mr. and Mrs. Really Bad Marriage, Mr. Over the Falls in a Wooden Barrel." Off in the distance Jasper could hear a wolf howling, which was strange. What had Serena said? It was all marsupials here. The plaintive noise reverberated in his mouth. The bearded man was practically gnashing his teeth, smiling ferociously. "I have seen snow, and I have been hungry, and I have seen nothing in my travels that is so bad as not living. I propose a toast, Mr. Todd." They both raised their glasses. "To travel," one said. "To life," said the other. Some are leaving this fall for Texas, and more are going in the spring to California and Oregon. For my part, I have no desire to go anywhere. I am far enough west now, and do believe some people might go west until they have been around the world and never find a place to stop. Elvira Power Hines, March 1852.